Here. Little bit about my background, just for those of you that are new. My name is Nick Garcia, and I'm a professional speaker, I'm a trainer, and I am a business coach. So this is something that I actually do pro bono for AHECT. I really enjoy doing it. I've spoken all over the country to thousands and thousands of business owners, prospective speakers, and Fortune 500 companies. So this is something that I do about twice a year. I actually enjoy doing it. It's fun for me, so I'd love to give you some of the insight that I have and get some feedback from you as well in terms of things you really want to get out of this class. And I want to encourage you guys, this is interactive, okay? So I want you to ask questions, okay? If you have questions or thoughts, this is the time to jump out of your shell. If you get a little nervous when you're up here on stage or when you have to do any sort of public speaking, this is the time to make mistakes, okay? I want to be clear that we don't want to make mistakes when we're out there and there's an actual audience. We want to make them in here when it doesn't really matter, right? Because none of us really care if you make a mistake or you flub something. This is the time to do it, which goes back to my number one word that I will repeat over and over and over, which is practice. Okay, and that is the one thing that I see over and over, and I've seen Fortune 500 CEOs make this mistake where they think they know their material, and then they'll get up in front of the room and you will see them and their way through an entire speech, which is really difficult to watch sometimes. So I want to make sure none of you fall into that trap, and I'm going to show you a lot of tactics and strategies on how to get through those types of things today. So, questions before we get started? Any questions? This is your time to be interactive. Okay, well, before we jump into the material, I want to get some goals from everyone. So I just want to go around the room and find out specifically what would you like to leave here today knowing more about. Very specifically, not generally, but what do you specifically want to take away from this today and utilize in the next opportunity you have to speak in front of a group? So,
I think my goal would be tomorrow. What I would think is to write a speech that's more to the point, but also I'm a comedian at heart, so I'm always interjecting funny stuff.
So you want to be more concise and how to insert humor into those concise speeches.
No problem. I always do that at will. That comes second.
Okay. So you want to figure out how to be more concise then.
I've written at family gatherings, Thanksgiving, Christmas, or whatever it is, and all my family, the first person will say, well, Bob, could you say the prayer or something like that? Mm-hmm. I share that responsibility with my son. I try to get him, he's 14, to do that, but he's more comfortable in front of a camera and a microphone. So in public, he won't do it.
It's just a robotic human eyes, I'm telling you. It's no different.
And he's like, I'm comfortable like that, but I try to get him to come here. So he's on the fence with that. But my goal, I think, would be, because I get feedback from my wife, and they're your harshest critic. You wandered. You didn't get to the point. You're too funny, and it was more of yes, we need constructive criticism, but at the same time, I need someone kind of lift you up. Now I was pushing you down.
Right. I can definitely help you with that. So that's a good goal. Let's start out with that, and by the end of the class, you're going to have some specific tactics that you can utilize that are going to be tangible, that you can write down, you can utilize in your next speech. So I'll help you out with that. What can I help you with today? Specifically.
Marketing myself.
Good. Have some great ideas for you on that. What can I help you with today?
Getting rid of the ums and the stalls and staying more focused.
Good.
Subject matter mastery.
Good. And these kind of go hand in hand, those two. Yes.
Me.
Yeah.
Along the lines of what she just said, so I have a broad, when you're a therapist, there's so many different avenues. I want to find the one I'm passionate about because when somebody's passionate about something, it comes across. So it's like figuring out what my niche is, what's my subject matter that I want to be passionate about, to be able to even write that first script.
Good. I'm going to give you something right now, and this will be useful for all of you to utilize. So I'm going to give you something right now. And at the risk of sounding like I'm oversimplifying, it helps if you write things down, guys, because your brain sometimes works in different ways. We can hear things, and then we can see things, and then we can touch things. So some of us are audio, some of us are verbal, some of us are kinesthetic. So it helps if you write these down. But here's what I would write down in terms of that. And I want you to think about it as we go through the material today, and then at the end, I'll ask you for your thoughts on your passion. Here's the question that I want you to write down. What would you speak about if no one was paying you?
That's good.
Okay? If you want to find out what you're really passionate about, what you really will be able to deliver an enormous amount of value to people with, ask yourself that question. What would I speak about for free? What would I do if nobody even paid me to do it? I just enjoyed it that much. Okay? And start thinking about that question. What happens is you can start brainstorming with yourself, and you write down 10 things that I would talk about if no one even paid me, and all of a sudden your subject matter writes itself. Okay? So start thinking about that, and we'll come back to that at the end and make sure that we get some specifics for you. Anna Maria, right?
Yes, thank you. I guess my thing would be, and it seems weird, but just to put together a good outline to stick to. I have, my topic is so broad, like she was saying, and it's hard for me to just, put it in.
Good. I'll show you how to construct a good outline, and then from that outline you can get specific on what your topic is. So I'll show you how to do that today specifically. What can I help you with today?
I just want to make a good impression on the audience.
I'm going to give you guys a tactic right now that is a very easy way to make a good impression. Okay? Some of these things you may say, wow, is he oversimplifying this? And what I'm doing is I'm making it easy to understand, because a lot of times we know what to do, but we don't always do what we know, right? Here's a great way to make a good impression on your audience. Actually care about what they're going to do with your material, okay? Don't care so much about what you're saying or the material that you're giving. Care more about, what do I want the end user to do with this material? Okay? That is a way to make an impression, because when they feel that you care about them and the outcome, okay, that becomes transparent. They'll see that. Okay? If they feel like all you care about is, hey, watch me, I'm the expert, listen to me, hear me, right, you lose your audience. But when they feel like this person actually cares about me personally, okay, that'll shine through. So that's an easy way to make a good impression. Now I'm going to get very specific on tactics that you can use to make that happen, okay, because I don't want it to be completely esoteric. I want to make sure you have strategies to utilize that. Other goals that you guys could think of as we went through these. Sometimes goals pop up and you say, oh, there's one other thing I really want to get today. Anything else that you guys can think of? Don't be shy. You're all going to... Speech writing? Okay, specifically, what do you mean by that?
Outline, how did it opening, the body, and the ending?
Okay, so more of an outline.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to give you some specifics on that. It's actually going to be a recap of a little bit what we talked about last time, because so often, and believe me, I've been in that space, guys. If you haven't been in that space yet, you will be, where you're going to feel like our friend up here, right, when we get up there. Even if on the outside we seem kind of confident, if we're shaky inside, okay, it's an interesting thing that happens. And I heard a story to kind of exemplify what this picture looks like. And it was a story about a famous singer in the 70s. Her name was Linda Ronstadt. And she said, she had terrible stage fright, by the way. And she said, when I would go out on stage, or right before I would go out on stage to do a concert, she said, my palms would start to sweat, and my heart would start racing, and I would start to get nervous, and I would feel like I'm going to fall apart. Okay? And then she would go out on stage and inevitably do her show, but she was completely nervous. Well, here's an interesting thing. Because they asked the same thing to the boss, right? Bruce Springsteen. They said, well, how do you feel before a show? And he said, well, my palms start to sweat, and my heart starts to race, and then I know I'm ready to rock, right? Two completely different views with the same physiology happening, right? And again, at the risk of being a little esoteric, this is key to understanding your mind and your body's reaction to speaking before you speak. Because if you want to know what is it about a great speaker that makes them impactful, is that they have the ability to take that nervousness and turn it into excitement. And your audience feels that. And that will make all the difference, okay, when you're actually up there. So we can turn ourselves from this person into someone who's actually excited, and it's the exact same physiology that happens. Okay? Questions on that? Thoughts? Okay. This is a little bit of a recap from our last class, but it bears repeating for everyone. Okay? Guys, for those of you that didn't know this, you, yes, all of you, are in sales. So what do I mean by that? I mean, you are influencers. You are persuaders. Okay, when you step in front of the room, you are influencing and persuading people to listen to you, or perhaps to take action on something that you're talking about, right? Even if you say, well, Nick, I'm not really asking them to do anything. I'm just asking them to be entertained by what I say. Let's say you were doing a humorous speech, right? Now, if you're doing a humorous speech, aren't you persuading them to get involved and laugh at whatever you're saying, right? If they're not laughing, then you're not persuading them enough to do whatever it is you want them to do. So you want to get your audience to do what you want them to do. And to understand that, you have to understand you're in sales. Okay? Yes, sir.
Just a quick interjection. In my business club, we meet every week,
Mm-hmm.
and in the closing argument, it's just my style to sum up the meeting and end with a joke. And there's times when I fall on my face. And I know the joke is a good, clean joke. It's quite funny. And then I'll hear, Have we all been there? And then there's times when I have just a so-so joke, but for some reason we've engaged the client or the audience before, or maybe we bring the anticipation up or something, and I haven't even got to that stage. And already I got them in stitches, and I'm like, what did I do right or what did I do wrong?
Right. An interesting thing happens when you interject humor, and you never know, including professional comedians who get on stage, because they practice their material in small clubs before they go and do a huge audience, the same way that you should practice, in the mirror before you actually go do it with a live audience. Well, the interesting thing with humor is if something ends up dying or falling flat in a room, that's okay. It's an easy recovery. And here's what I would write down, guys. Call out the pink elephant in the room. What do I mean by that? Bring attention to it. Okay, if you're up at the front of the room and you're trying to insert humor into your speech and it falls flat and the audience says, like you said, kind of falls flat like that, that's okay. Say, I guess my joke failed. Well, how about you give me a laugh anyways? Okay? And bring attention to the fact that you understand that the joke fell flat. Okay? If you try to avoid it, what happens, guys, is you create a barrier between you and the audience where there's this uncomfortableness. And they feel it, and you feel it, but nobody brings attention to it. And for the rest of your speech, whether it's at the beginning or the end, okay, there's a barrier. So you need to break that barrier down and say, that joke fell flat. Well, how about you give me a laugh? And when you bring attention to it, all of a sudden they say, he's human or she's human. They make mistakes, and all of a sudden you've brought yourself to the same level as the audience, and they're so happy about that. Yeah.
At the same time, you have the opposite sense of the fence. When you do something like that, it's called hecklers.
Mm-hmm.
And someone says, "Oh, you suck."
Right. You're talking about stand-up comedy, or you're talking about in
Whatever it is. another
Right.
part of my history.
I'm glad you brought that up because I'm going to talk about how to deal with a poison today.
Right, I just
Okay.
want to let everyone know another part of my history or what I'm ongoing. I'm one of the organizers for the King Mango Strut Parade in Coconut Grove. If anyone knows about the parade,
What is that?
it's the King Mango Strut. It's a parody parade that's held every first Sunday after Christmas every year, and we parody everything that's going on in the world, political,
So sketches, essentially, right?
and it's a volunteer thing. So we go out and do our little skits. I mean, in the past, I've done everything from Dr. Botox to Asian flu.
And you get hecklers in these situations?
Well,
Is that what you're asking about?
yeah, I mean, like, something happens and, well, this was a positive. I didn't realize this. One day 2 years ago, I did, when we had a lead thing in China, the toys had lead in the toys. You remember that?
I don't. I'm sorry.
Toys imported from China and have
Okay.
high levels of lead, and the kids
Okay.
so that a recall. So to make it funny, we were playing with that and said, hey, buy our toothpaste, 100% lead, buy our
Right. Parodying
I'm going-
the real events.
all of this, and I'm doing my skit, and in the back of the voice and says, oh, you Chinese something, and then I suck. And without even thinking, I said, that's not what your wife said last night. And this guy was laughing, and I looked around with a friend of mine from the Mensa. I never thought much about it, and then this year here, this
Right.
has gone 2 years, he comes around to our meeting and says, hey, let me tell you about the story with Bob. I heckled him when he came back with this, and the whole crowd.
And I'll tell you what, that's one of those types of situations. If you're getting heckled or if somebody says something back to you, that makes the situation uncomfortable, you certainly have to address it. What I'd like to give you guys today are some strategies that are safe to handle hecklers, because it's great that it worked in that environment, but I will tell you, if you respond in some situations with a response like that, you could actually lose your audience. Okay, and I want to make sure nobody loses their audience. So let me address that when we get to the poison section, and I'll give you some suggestions on that. So I mentioned this the last time we met. And as repetition is the mother of skill, it bears repeating. So I want you all to keep in mind that you are in the business, when you're speaking, of infotainment. Infotainment. If you haven't heard that word yet, for those of you that are newer or just need a recap from the first class when we met, infotainment is interesting because some speakers will get up and they will entertain you, which is great, and that's nice, but they don't give you any information. Okay? And by the same token, you have some speakers that will give you tons of information, but they are an absolute bore to listen to, right? You have to understand, and I don't care what subject matter you've in. I've spoken all over the country. I've spoken on a dozen different topics. I've seen speakers on every single industry, and the best ones, regardless of what industry they're in, they will inform you and they will entertain you. Okay? If you are missing one or the other, you will lose your audience. Because what's your goal as a speaker? What is your goal? No wrong answers here. What's your goal? Tell me what you think your goals are.
To bring something of value to the people you're, information.
So to bring something of value. Okay, what else? What are your other goals?
To keep them, just draw a blank, to keep them engaged,
Engagement. Okay?
even if your material is good.
Value and engagement. What else?
Empower.
Empower. Good.
But what if you're not funny?
If you're not funny, good. That's fine. We'll cover that. You don't have to be funny. I'm not funny. Trust me, I'm not. I've tried. It doesn't work. For me, it doesn't work. I'm not funny enough, okay? Now, I can be entertaining without being funny, okay? Okay, and sometimes self-deprecation will help with that. But in order to get your audience engaged and bring them value and empower them, you have to keep their attention. How do you keep their attention? By both informing them and entertaining them, okay? And one does not come before the other. You need to have both. It's absolutely key, okay? So it's worth, good morning, come on in. There's some seats back here. No problem at all. Take your time. So, what are we going to talk about today? I want to give you guys an overview of what we're going to chat about. First part, we're going to talk about how to identify your audience, okay? Who is your audience? If you're wondering, well, I'm going to speak on a certain topic or maybe several different topics, who should I really be talking to? In other words, who cares about what I'm talking about? Who would want to listen to the things that I'm speaking about? All right, number 2, who needs the information that I'm going to share? Right? Who really needs to know what I'm talking about? Who needs to hear the words that are coming out of my mouth? Right? These are questions that you have to ask before you ever write your speech, by the way. Okay? First you identify the audience, then you write your speech, not the other way around. All right? Third, where do you find your audience? Okay, I got my speech written. I know who's supposed to be listening to me. I know what I need to share with them. Now, where do I find these people? Right? Where are these folks? How do I get them to come listen to what I have to say? Right? And lastly, how do you make your content appropriate for any audience? All right? Now, here's the thing that you're going to encounter. You're going to be speaking at some point in your life, if you haven't done it yet, okay, you're going to be speaking to different kinds of audiences, very likely on the same subject matter. You have to be able to quickly read your room to know, is the subject matter that I'm talking about appropriate for this particular audience, or do I need to tweak it a little, right? Sometimes you need to tweak what you're talking about for an audience of 10 versus an audience of 100, or an audience of women versus an audience of men, or an audience of professionals versus an audience of teenagers, okay? And you may speak to all different kinds at some point in your career. So it's important to understand, how do you make it appropriate? Sometimes you got to do it on the spot. Right? Sometimes you don't know who your audience is exactly going to be until you peek out the curtain and you see, all right, this is who the 200 people out there are. Right? So we have to be able to tweak that, and I'm going to give you some strategies on how to do that. What else are we going to talk about? The second part of today, because we're here till 1. Okay, don't worry, we'll have breaks, I promise. We'll have bathroom breaks. Second part, we're going to talk about how do you engage your audience so they C-A-R-E, care. Care about what you're saying. Okay? That is a business strategy, caring. If you want to know a really good business strategy for your speaking business, okay, because that is part of the business that you're in, is getting your audience to care, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay? Establishing control and pace right from the start. Okay? You don't want your audience taking over when you're up here. Okay? You need to make sure you let them know that you're the one that's running the show, but that they can still have interaction with you. And also that you're establishing the pace, that they know what the time limits are, that they know the time constraints, that you're not moving too fast, too slow, okay, too meager. Yes?
This is the second part, from 11 o'clock to 1?
Yeah, roughly. That's what we'll go into second. How to ask for their attention and get their permission to educate them. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do that. How to handle distractions, which is what you brought up earlier, right? How do you establish yourself as an expert in your field? All right, whatever it is you're talking about. Now, you guys talk to a vast different number of people on a vast different number of subjects. I'm going to talk about how do you establish yourself as an expert in your particular field. And it's pretty easy to do, easier than you might think. Okay? Audience comprehension. How do you make sure that they understand what it is you're talking about? Okay? I'll show you how to do those status checks. Right? Getting the audience involved. How do you do that? Whether it's an audience of 5 or 500 or 5,000. Okay? I'm going to show you how to get them involved. You want to make sure at any point that you're not the only one doing the talking. Right? Then it becomes a monologue instead of a dialogue, and you really want to have a dialogue. How to grab them and hold them instantly. I'm going to show you how to do that from the very, very beginning. Right? How to deal with a poison, again, along the lines of what you were mentioning before. What do you deal, how do you deal with those folks when you have a heckler, or someone is poisoning your room, or someone says, you're full of it, I don't believe anything you're saying, or you're not funny, or I disagree with what you're saying, or hey, I have another distraction in question, that from the back of the room where it's a constant interruption, right? How to deal with those types of people, okay? Using multiple learning platforms. Everyone learns differently, right? Make sure that you cover all 3 platforms. I'm going to show you how to do that and what those 3 platforms are. The importance of using visual aids. It is absolutely compulsory in 99.9% of situations to have some sort of visual aid. And I'm going to tell you why and how to use both of those things. Okay, we're going to use pictures, videos, all kinds of things, guys, and a lot more. We're going to talk about more than just that, but those are the mainstays. Questions on anything else? Any other goals that you think have come up that you guys want to chat about that I haven't covered yet?
I do.
Yeah,
So you said in the first one, engaging your audience so they care.
yeah.
No,
Right here, yeah.
so they care. And in the first part, you said that they need to see that you care.
Right. Because here's what happens so often is, and this is going to go into, I'm going to preempt myself a little bit, but it's worth repeating. Sometimes you care about what you're talking about, and you're up there wondering, you're speaking, and you're looking at the audience, and you're wondering, do they really care what I'm talking about? Are they listening? You know, are they getting on their phones, or are they thinking about other things? Are they thinking about, what am I going to have for lunch? You know, have you lost your audience? Okay, I'm going to show you how to do a status check throughout your presentation. So you care, status check, and then they care. All right? And this is going to be a circle that you repeat over and over. You, status, they. Make sure they're engaged, goes back to you. Then you do a status check to make sure they are engaged. And then you go back and you do this over and over through your presentation. Does that make sense, guys?
Yes.
Okay.
That's an example of a status check. Okay? All these things that I'm going to teach you today, I'm going to utilize with you. All right? Live, so you can see how it works in a real environment. All right? A great way to do a status check is to say, does that make sense? Is everyone with me? Right? Say aye if you're with me, or get a show of hands. Let me see a set of hands if you guys understand what I'm talking about, right? Ask them to raise their hands. That's an example of a status check. Okay? Make sense? All right. Let's dive into the meat and potatoes. So, who needs the info that you're going to be sharing? All right? How many of you, by the way, really want to know who should my audience be? Or do you guys all know exactly who your audience should be? Or how many of you won't answer no matter what? Okay, you want to know. Great. Okay, so let's start with this. What is your topic? So give me an example of what your topic is.
Well, I talk a lot about mental health and spirituality.
Okay, and who does that affect?
I think it affects everyone.
It affects everyone. Good. So she started out very broad, guys, and I want you to understand this. If you're wondering who needs the information I should be sharing, and I'm going to have some input from the AHEC organization that set this up in terms of who your audience should be, because they have some specific suggestions that I know they want to share in terms of getting audience for health-related speeches. But I want to start out with, it should always be broad and then narrow it down, okay? Almost everyone needs information on whatever it is you're talking about, because they may know someone that it affects, or they may know a friend of someone who it may affect. So you always want to start broad. Who does it affect? Who do they know that it affects, right? These are referrals. In other words, anytime that you are talking to someone or networking, let them know what it is you... I'm sorry? Am I out of the line of sight? Okay. Who does it affect externally? Who does it affect externally? Meaning, maybe you're doing a speech for 30 people, and the thing that you're talking about, which is subject matter what?
Mental health.
Mental health. You have 30 people in the room. It directly affects, let's say, 10 of those people. Okay? Make sure you're finding out for those other 20 people, do you know someone that is afflicted by this situation? Or have you heard of someone that's afflicted by this situation? Okay? Find out who it affects externally. That gives you a much broader audience. So it's not just people that want to know about mental health, it's everyone that's affected by it. Let me give you an example. And by the way, guys, this is a strategy that I want to write down that all of you should be using. When you give a piece of information to your audience, there's two ways that you want to back up that information. Examples or Geez, I'm a terrible speller. Decent speaker, terrible speller. Analogies. Examples and analogies. Those are two tools that you want to use to back up every piece of information that you give. So, when I say, all right, who does it affect externally? Let me give you an example, right? If you're speaking about substance abuse, as an example, does substance abuse only affect the abusers
No.
of alcohol or drugs? No. Who else does it affect? Tell me.
Family and friends.
The family, friends,
Society.
society, right? The taxpayers. Who else?
The countries.
Yeah, employers. Who else?
Everybody.
Everybody. You just figured out who your audience is. Everybody, right? So when you start off your speech, all of a sudden you're not speaking to substance abusers, you're speaking to everyone because it affects everyone. Does that make sense, guys?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to get your gears going about the subject matter that you're talking about, right? And how it could affect more people than maybe a narrowed focus that you've been thinking in the past, all right? Who could it affect later, right? Let's say you're talking to a group of people in their 20s and 30s, and you're talking about retirement or some sort of subject matter related to retirement. Again, guys, I'm using an example to give you. Right? People in their 20s and 30s may not be interested in retirement yet, right? They may not be thinking about that. That's so far down the road. Okay? But could you give them information that would be relevant to them down the line that they would be interested in now? By the way, is there anyone that they know that's in retirement that they could help? Right? Do they have friends, family, employers, acquaintances, network? You know, are they involved with any other human being that they could utilize this information for? And get them to answer yes to that question, because that way they're going to care about what you have to say. Remember I told you I was going to give you some strategies? If you feel like you're in a room with 20 and 30-year-olds and you're speaking about retirement and you're wondering while you're up here, does anybody care about what I'm talking about? Ask them the question. Say, I understand you may not think you care about retirement, but let me tell you how much that's going to affect you. Okay? What if your mother, father, grandmother, grandfather was in a situation that they needed home care and they had nowhere to go and you couldn't afford a home? Now that affects you, someone in their 20s and 30s. Let me tell you how to use those strategies to get through that time in your life. Now you've made it applicable to that audience. Okay? So you want to broaden your range. An easier way to get bigger audiences is to broaden the range of what you're talking about. Okay? A pet example. You give a really good example of this, so why don't you share that with everyone? You were telling me the pet example. You don't remember the example? I actually stole this from you. Said pets don't, or it was loss, right? You're talking about loss. So we had a speaker that she spoke on loss, and she said, well, the only people I feel like I can talk to is someone that, you know, just lost a spouse or a loved one. You said, well, what about a loss of a pet? Right? What about a loss of, you know, a dog or a cat? Or what about a loss of your home if you had a fire? Right? What about a loss of your entire financial future if you invested with Bernie Madoff? Right? There are lots of different kinds of loss. And all of a sudden it opened her eyes, right, to all these different people that she could be speaking to. And originally she thought it was just someone that had someone in their life that died. Right? And now she said, well, really, loss applies to everyone. Right? This is how you broaden your audience. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Questions on that? Because sometimes I know I will talk about this particular subject and someone will say, Nick, I understand what you're saying, but in my particular situation, that's not the case. So if you're thinking that, let us brainstorm how we can broaden your audience right now. Does anyone need help broadening their audience? It's good to have a mastermind group like this where we can brainstorm. Anyone need help broadening their audience? Okay. Good. We'll use these strategies. These are, yes?
I wanted to ask a question in reference to her statement of mental health.
Yeah.
On mental health, no, everybody don't identify themselves as having a mental health issue. So how can she narrow it down? Because I know for those who have bipolar or dealing with other issues, when she's trying to talk to a specific group, how could she broaden that?
So in those situations, I would ask for, it's the audience's job to be vague. Okay? They're vague. It's your job to be specific. So, if you know that you are speaking to an audience about mental health, okay, and you're wondering, how can I narrow